Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Mehta, editor of Fast Company. I am so pleased to welcome to the Fast Company Innovation Festival Chip and Joanna Gaines, co-founders of Magnolia, a home and lifestyle brand, and co-chief creative officers of the forthcoming Magnolia Network. Chip and Joanna, thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
So we were supposed to do a version of this conversation back at South by Southwest in March, and unfortunately, the conference was canceled due to the spread of COVID-19. I'd just love to ask how you and the family have been doing since then, and how you've been keeping occupied and sane during this period.
Yeah, a lot of complications and a lot of used to sane and family and all the things were sort of easy, sort of second nature. But now to keep your sanity and to manage the family life during these very unique times that we're all sort of wrestling through together has been, just unlike anything I've ever experienced. I'm 45 years old, and obviously been through a few things, give or take, but this COVID thing has really been unique and very complicated, to say the least. And it's interesting when you say the South by Southwest and how we were scheduled to be there. Doesn't that feel like 100 years ago?
It does.
Even as you said that, I remember when it was forced to cancel and how we kind of reeled from that, because I don't remember the exact statistics, but that event had gone consecutively for some number of decades, and for it to have gotten canceled, back at that time just seemed really jolting.
And they were giving the numbers of like how businesses in Austin would be affected, and at the time we didn't know what was coming. We thought, oh, this is going to be a hard month so now where are we?
Months and months and months later. Yeah.
Almost October. It's just crazy that depending on where you are in the country and how things are slowly opening up, it's just been one of those things I think that has forced all of us to reevaluate just specific foundations, whether that be in the home, like the things we're used to and how all of that kind of got a little interrupted. And then even in business, just kind of getting back down to the foundation of things and everything shifting and just reevaluating what's the most important. So even though it's been tricky, I'd say we can look back and just say, it's been unbelievable, but it's also forced us to just get, I think,
kind of reevaluate everything in a lot of ways. But it's specifically, how's the family holding up?
The family, we're home. All of us are homebodies for the most part. So today I was sitting with the kids and crew was like coloring all over the floor. I have all this paper on the floor, and each kid is on their Zoom call, and I'm throwing stuff at the kids just to try to, because they're trying to be all serious and make sure mom doesn't mess up their Zoom call. So I just like to jack with them, but it's just so cute to see them in their little elements, like little business professionals. They all have their headphones on, they all have their classroom, but they're handling it so well. Kids are so resilient. And so I think we can take a lot of lessons from them and how they're not complaining about it. I think to the kids, they love being home. They can eat a snack right there. They can kind of sit like this. They can. So I kept telling Drake to straighten up.
Chew bubble gum and not get called out. Yeah.
So it's just been fun to watch. And I'd say for the family, it's been a sweet time.
Yeah, that is really nice. I reflect back and I think I can't remember the last time I've had a dinner consecutively over 6 months every night with my family, and it's been great.
Sure.
Well, I know you two have been busy during this period because you are planning a new television network. So let's talk about it. Last year, you announced a joint venture with Discovery, which is also the parent of HGTV, and you're going to have a new linear network on basic cable television, Magnolia Network. So you guys are so busy. You have a big empire. We're going to talk a little bit about some of your other businesses in a minute, but Why did you want to start a TV network?
kind of a funny way, a funny thought comes to mind is like, we can look back and wonder why we wanted to do a lot of the stuff that we've done over the last 5 to 10 years. And sadly, this is no different. You know, I wish there was this magic, amazing answer that made it all clear and logical. But to be really frank, and maybe to just break it down to what I would refer to as kind of like the lowest common denominator, Joe and I love challenges. We love storytelling. We didn't know this. I am a contractor by trade, and Joe is a small boutique owner and designer by trade. But yet when we shone a light on those two examples, contractor here and designer and small business owner, boutique owner, in the other hand, you know, all of a sudden it just sort of interjected jet fuel into a pretty traditional career that Joe and I were experiencing before the television piece set in. And so as the TV thing started occurring, and we were new to it, obviously still feel new to it even today, but 6-7 years ago when we were first starting the Fixer Upper experience, we were completely new to that universe. But as the stories started revealing themselves on television, Joe and I, because we're just so normal, you know, we're not what you think. You know, if you think of us as the couple next door that you'd like to have a cup of coffee with or a beer with, I mean, it's sincerely who Joe and I are. So as Joe and I started seeing these stories come to life, we would be sitting on a friend's couch watching Fixer Upper on a Tuesday evening going, wow, that's really interesting. I remember doing all that, and really it was kind of boring. Remember we did this, and remember we did that, and how did they cut and paste all that? And so the more we learned about that experience, the more I would say we fell in love with that process. And we just, by season 3, I would say we finally started feeling acclimated in regards to like the television side of that ecosystem. And Joe and I just stepped back away from that at about season 3, and we're just like, we love the storytelling part of this process. And that's really where the magazine kind of came into the equation. The magazine, no different than the network, was just a phone call from a group of guys that we sort of had a kindred spirit with. And very quickly, the company's Meredith that actually produces or publishes our magazine, Joe and the guys at Meredith and the guys and gals at Meredith really just created very quickly a real synergy, and they realized they wanted to do this magazine. And not only did they want to do the magazine, but they wanted to do it differently. And so as that whole thing played out, long story short, that sort of has become our new mode of operation. You know, when Discovery, David Zaslav specifically reached out to us about the network, at first we were a little bit like, you know, we're just not interested. I don't think
at first it was the idea of like a show. So a specific, hey, do you and Chip want to be back on television?
Sure.
And I think one thing we learned throughout the magazine process was the thing we love most was not actually us being on the show, was us getting to highlight other people, their stories, their passions, and kind of curating that. And that's what the magazine became. So when David came down and we had other meetings with several different people, it always came back to, what show would you guys want to do? You can do any show you want. And for us, it wasn't about us getting back on TV. That wasn't the motivator. But when David presented the idea of this network, and then we started going, oh, this could be the magazine coming to life. This could be us getting to curate and create stories and content that if we want to be in them, great. But if we don't, it's not contingent on that. So I think that's where it really kind of clicked with us. And we thought, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to tell stories. And then if we want to do Fixer, if we want to do a cooking show, that's great, but it's not contingent on that. And I think that's why we just fell in love with the idea of this network.
But Fixer will be back as part of the Magnolia Network. Is that correct?
And that's truly I mean, what do you think, 6 weeks ago?
Oh, like a fly by the seat of our pants decision. Yeah.
All the money that we would never do this again. And then 6 weeks ago, we just kind of looked at each other and said, hey, what do you think? And
6 months ago, there was zero chance that we were going to do Fixer Upper season 6, if you will. And now all of a sudden we're doing season 6 of Fixer Upper.
So we just started filming last week. I mean, it's, we're all of a sudden knee deep in it. So here we go.
And so you said 6 weeks ago, basically, you kind of looked at each other and said you wanted to do another season. What was it? Were you so inspired by the work you were doing with the network that you wanted to to have a chance to get back in, or was there a nostalgic tug of Fixer Upper that made you want to dive back in?
That is a great question, and I think this one's going to be my least winded
You
answer.
always say that.
I say
and it's
that,
gonna be
and
the
then I always,
longest.
12
Don't
minutes
be scared,
later.
Steph. We're only on question 1, and it's been 45 minutes.
12 minutes later, I'll be halfway through this one, but I really believe I can land this one. We were sitting on our front porch, and we were doing a quick little cameo or segment, whatever they referred to it as, of us explaining what some of the shows were going to be on the network. And I, off the cuff, this was not planned or thought out. I just off the cuff said, Fixer Upper is where we've been, and the Magnolia Network is where we're headed and where we're going. And so I was just trying to make the clear distinction between who we were and who we're going to be as we start rolling out these shows. And when we watched that little segment back, it really hit Joe and I both like, isn't that sort of fascinating that it's for sure who we've been and the network is sure who we're going to be. But isn't that funny how maybe in a circular sense, there might be some way to sort of combine these two or connect these two from bookend to bookend. And so as we opened our eyes and mind to the option of maybe bringing Fixer Upper into the equation to kind of say, here's who we've been. And this is what we're interested in as it relates to the construction and the design and our marriage and our family. But, here's where we're going. And so as we kind of wrestled with that thought, it really allowed us to kind of come full circle on the concept and the possibility of what if Fixer Upper was really how we introduced the network in some ways. Maybe more people will show up if Fixer Upper is a part of it, so we can then hand the baton off to some of these other options and shows and people and stories that we've fallen in love with through this process. But it really happened very similar to the way you described it. It was kind of this nostalgic who we were versus who we are. Maybe these two could meet and be friends, and it kind of dawned on us in that way.
I can't help but notice that the two examples that you cited, the network and the magazine, are, in some people's minds, really old-fashioned ways of telling stories and communicating. In a world where so many creators are turning to streaming or turning to social media platforms, what's the allure of a linear television network? And, maybe you, Joanna, can also talk about the magazine business.
With the magazine business, what I felt like I knew I wanted for Magnolia Journal was the idea of getting back to that place of loving the idea of holding the magazine, getting in your favorite corner with your favorite cup of coffee, like really feeling the value in that it wasn't about all the ads. And that was one of the things we fought really hard for, that, there's a certain limit of ads and I won't allow it to go over that, because I really wanted people to feel like we valued their time. We didn't want them combing through a ton of ads to get to a good story. Amen. And then every story that's there, the team, we look at everything and say, is this meaningful? We never want to just put stuff on paper to say we've got it done. And I think the same thing with this network is, for us, when we think about television back in the old days, like we always resonate with things that are just like back to the basics. What are the things? What's the nostalgic sense? And that's what the TV thing felt for us.
Sure. As
a family, when we were little, we'd get around the table, we'd watch the programming that was coming on, and then now you see just how everyone watches television now. Everyone's in their own room, on their own device. It's no longer a thing of bringing families together. It's everyone doing their own thing kind of separately.
Sure.
And we got excited about just that idea of getting people to get back around that television and being with family and leaving and being inspired. And, we still don't have a television, but I will say when we go to hotels and we sit and binge watch because we get excited about seeing, we realize, there is still a space and time for, I think, great programming that's
Sure.
highly meaningful, highly authentic, and intentional. And that's where we get excited, because that's the kind of story that we're wanting to tell.
Sure. And I want to just add one little thought, which is like, we really thought about the magazine practically when we were back in that day making that decision. And I just remember that we both came to this really clear point of view that we're not sure we're ready to concede to a world or live in a world, if you will, that doesn't include being able to pick up an actual book and turn an actual page and read actual content. We've got kids lots of kids, but a kid or two that I'm specifically referring to that think if they listen to a book on audio, that it's the same as them reading a book that was, offered to them by a teacher as a mandatory reading assignment. And that's where Joe and I are just like torn. It's just like, no, I want my child to be able to actually open a book and to read that content, because I think the value of that experience is so overwhelming. So I don't want to overstate the TV part of this equation, because we don't really care where the content is viewed. I mean, it can be on somebody's device. It can be in a traditional TV, which I think is getting, the audience there is getting smaller and smaller, and we kind of all concede to that. But my point is just this idea about us coming together as a collective group of people, or as a family, if you will, and us watching content from one source. Yeah. And that is something that is important to us. And whether it's everybody has their own freaking device, but we're all there together commenting on the same show or opportunity, then great. But we just don't love the idea that it's everybody has to be separate, and that people don't come together over meals and over books and over magazines and over television. I feel like there's going to be a market for that well into the future, even though I do concede to the fact that, of course, how that looks exactly is still a little yet to be determined.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. I'm an ink-stained wretch myself, so I hear what you're saying. So let's talk a little bit about the stories that you plan to tell. You can talk a little bit about the stories in print, but I'm really interested in the stories that you've unearthed for the network. You've announced a number of the shows already. What were you trying to achieve, and what kinds of stories did you want to tell on Magnolia Network? And I know that the key here is that they need to be able to have a season-long trajectory. So talk a little bit about how you went about finding talent.
I think we did it, we always like to do things differently, maybe even the harder way.
Untraditionally, for sure.
We didn't go out and do casting calls, anything like that. We just looked around and found talent that we either had been following for years, or stories that we had read, with Erin French, who's doing The Lost Kitchen. I read about her like 2 years ago in I don't remember, like the New York Times or something, and just always remembered her story. So Sure. What happened was just this idea that we get people that we're really interested in, and we call them and say, do you want to be on TV?
And 2/3 of them say, no, thank you. And I will tell you, our secret ingredient, if this works, I mean, obviously we're preemptively describing something that has not proven its success or lack thereof. But if this works, I will say that we'll be able to go around the country and boast about how brilliant we were, and that the secret to good television is finding people who do not want to be on television, because that seems to be the consistent thought as it relates to most of the talent that we've talked into this incredible opportunity and journey.
It's what they're doing in real life that drew us to their story, that without the cameras on them, you could see the passion, you could see the drive, the risk. And then when you watch it, you're just like, no, I want to go do something. And I feel like that's what all of our talent, they all embody that. They all embody, it's like this family of risk takers and dreamers and passionate people who are putting their hands to work. And I think it's going to make great television.
Yeah. As I went through some of the programming that you've already announced, I can't help notice that the slate of talent is extremely diverse. Jonathan Morris is an African American. The family that you feature in the show Home on the Road is multicultural. Brian Patrick Flynn is gay, and his husband Hollis, I think, has appeared in some of your videos. Why is the inclusiveness important to you?
We both really believe that everyone truly deserves a seat at the table. And I think when you open your ears and your heart and your mind and you hear other people's stories and other people's unique perspective, it makes you richer as a person. And so for us to get to highlight all of these amazing people with unique talents and unique stories that are all going to be very different, I mean, we just feel like it's just going to be this beautiful tapestry that's woven together, telling really beautiful stories.
Boom. I couldn't say it any better, but I will only add this, is just like, for such a time as this, it's like our country and Joe and I debate this, are we more divided than ever? And then you wonder about the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. You know, there's been decades of this election's the most important in history. You know, it's like we've heard that so frequently that now you don't believe that that's in fact accurate. But I will say that we do feel this odd division that I would argue is certainly new to me as a 45-year-old. I've always understood the different political parties. I've always understood there were people of faith and people of no faith, and then people of even a different version than either of those two categories may conclude. But it's just there's something about, in Joe and I's opinion, bringing people together and letting true dialogue and true conversation occur, that different opinions make us all better. Different opinions make, and Joe said it perfectly, our lives richer. And so our network, make no mistake, will be no different in that sense, because the fact that we have people that see things from different perspectives or have lifestyles that are different than our own is going to make the overall experience much richer and much better. And we're really proud of that. And we really hope we hope we set trends. We hope we set things really in motion to where other people look at this as a way that we can all develop this new reality for the future, as opposed to turn on this channel for only perspectives that you agree to, and turn on this channel for only perspectives that you agree to. If you don't agree with those perspectives, you know, for Joe and I, that's crazy. And that's not the way we operate our kitchen table. That's not the way we operate our lives. And we want our network to really include lots and lots of perspectives so that the viewer really leaves with hopefully a very well-rounded and a very rich experience.
Put another way, is this also a way of making sure that everyone feels welcome at Magnolia Network? I think about my two hyper woke teenage kids. You know, is Magnolia a home for them as well as their grandparents who may have a very different worldview?
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think that's as pointed as a question as you could possibly get. And this happened to us years and years and years ago. We were in New York City. We were not famous. I think we had maybe gotten through a season of Fixer Upper. So it was very easy for us to go out in public, and it wasn't a thing in regards to being noticed and this and that. And this very wealthy older gentleman came up to Joe, and I kind of just walked right past me, but took a beeline to Joe. And this guy had to have been in his maybe 70s or 80s, and he had this beautiful coat on that I don't know anything about and still don't, but I learned about later. And he had this real engaging conversation with Joe. He said, my wife and I live down the street, and he pointed to basically what happened to have been Upper East Side, New York. And he said, we live up the street, and here's what we think, and we watch y'all's show, and we just are so thankful, and it reminds us of when we were younger and when we were this and we were that. And they just had a little moment. And I walked away, and I was just like, what in the world? We happened to be with a guy that was very well-traveled and much more sophisticated than myself. And he was like, man, if you knew how much that dude's trench coat was, your head would explode. And if you knew that when he pointed down the street, he was talking about a $5 million brownstone or $10 million or God knows, whatever the number was, but a crazy expensive brownstone that this guy lives in. And Joe and I, it resonated with us in a very practical way that true, authentic, powerful stories resonate no matter where you're from and what walk of life you may come from, how old you may or may not be. And so to your point about your woke teenagers versus your mom or dad in a totally different generation, we heard more often than not how that our show, which in this case I'm referring to Fixer Upper, would bring all those different generations together to watch a show for whatever reason, and everybody got different takeaways. But to your point, we really want Magnolia Network to feel like that experience. We want your kids to feel welcome. We want your grandmother to feel welcome. And we understand, that's not exactly possible, and that at some point you've got to say this is going to be programming or geared towards this audience or that audience. But generally speaking, we want people to, when they click past our channel, for them to say, hey, we'll be back. Even if this isn't exactly our cup of tea, we want to circle back because we certainly feel like, to Joe's point earlier, we're welcome at this table here.
The Magnolia Network model of taking an existing Discovery channel and turning it into a new network has been done once before. Discovery did it with the Oprah Winfrey Network many years ago. So the role model is a big one. What are your ambitions for Magnolia Network long term?
Yeah. We want to really honor the current DIY viewership. Like, we don't want to from day one just say, boom, everything's out. We've actually been curating even now, like, we're listening to the DIY viewer on what their favorite shows are, what they're wanting to see more of. And then our original content that will show up, that's been the interesting and creative part, is how do you marry these worlds when you're trying to tell this really specific story, but also still really honor what it was, because we don't want it to be so jolting right off the bat. But I would say, even with the streaming that's coming, that streaming's whole process can be a more just clear and defined story. But on DIY itself, our goal is to honor the current viewers, but also bring more story, more of this ecosystem, this lifestyle ecosystem. So not only is it about homes and renovations and design, it's about food, it's about wellness, it's about business. There's going to be some content for children. And where we're trying to be really smart and strategic is at what hour of the day do you show the cooking? At what hour? So that when you come, there really is something for everyone, but it's a very strategic time clock that is telling a unique story at that time.
So much of your journey has been tied to your identity as small business owners and as company builders. At what point in your journey as business owners did you realize that you had more in you than just being a small business owner? I think there are many people who think of their small business as their job. For you, this has become a lifestyle. This has become a source of a platform for growth. When did it click for you that Magnolia could be more than just a job?
Wow. I would say, and you kind of asked, I would argue two questions. And the Magnolia, when was it more than a job? I would say that happened very, very early in the process. We refer to Magnolia as Maggie, and Maggie is essentially
like our first daughter.
Confidentially, if you won't tell everybody this, just between us, is like we refer to her as our first child. Yeah. So Drakey, my 15-year-old boy, who is in fact my first child, is really a second child to little Maggie. That was our first business because it was the first thing that Joe and I created together. Yeah. And it was her little retail business and had nothing to do with real estate, had nothing to do with construction. It was just a small boutique store in Waco, Texas. And when we birthed that, if you will, we just remember how amazing the experience was to basically bring something to life in that fashion. And so, sorry, just to chase that quick rabbit, we've never thought of our job as just a job. We've never thought of this business as just a business. This is a family business, and I mean in the personal sense, we believe she's a child of ours that we birthed, and so in that sense, we've always been really passionate and very singular and very laser focused. But practically, we never saw this coming. We didn't predict this. I wish I could say that we get to go to Harvard and Yale and the likes.
There was no business plan.
And describe how we had this whole thing played out, and we knew that this was going to happen. But in fairness, I would say that our small business, which is still a small business in so many ways, has just taken on big responsibilities. So it's almost like, I would imagine, if your kid goes off to college and does all these great things, you always feel like they're your child and they're your kids, but it doesn't mean that they're not capable of taking on enormous responsibilities, whatever those responsibilities might be. So,
but I think from the beginning, what Magnolia kind of taught us both, and then how it with Chip, nothing is ever going to be just the same. Like, for me, I would say it's always been, I'd like to have one job, and I want to be in a cubicle and in a tiny little office, and that would be my life. Like, I like the idea of that control and just understanding what's coming next.
When we first met, she had these little things that you would put on your finger that almost looked like a little,
and it makes you turn the paper fast as you're
Yeah.
like counting the numbers.
And she would calculate these numbers and count these checks. And so she was very, very specific in that way.
I should be an accountant really at the end of the day. But what Chip has taught me is that you're always evolving as a business and you're always evolving as a human. Like I feel like so many times just the way culture is said, you go to high school, then you go to college, then you get your dream, like all the things. And like, I don't think that's really what life should be. You're supposed to retire when you're 60, like all that stuff. I just don't truly believe is really the way that everyone should live their life. And what Chip has taught me is that every day you will continue to evolve, and that happens to your business as well. And I'll say what Magnolia taught us from the beginning is we have this opportunity to create beauty. And for me at the time, it was doing these little displays with all my little merchandise things. And then that evolved into homes and getting to create beauty in these really old abandoned homes. And then as it got bigger, getting to create beauty in the magazine world. And then now on so I feel like what Magnolia taught us from the beginning is that we have an opportunity to create beauty that's right in front of us. And I think if you kind of look at everything we're doing, whether it's the restaurant or the coffee shop, it's not just a beautiful building. It's creating these beautiful moments with people as they're connecting at the booth with a cup of coffee. And so it is expanding and it's growing. I don't think we ever decided, hey, we're awesome, let's keep growing. I think it was more like any opportunity we get to create more beauty, we're all in.
Yeah, at Fast Company, a lot of our audiences and readers care a lot about the culture of the place where they work. Can you talk a little bit about what you have tried to create in terms of the atmosphere and culture of the different Magnolia businesses, whether it is the restaurant or, now people who are working alongside you in building the network? What makes Magnolia a place where people want to help you create beautiful things?
I've always felt like it's been like this belief that dreams really do come true. And when you are talking about a team, when Chip says, hey guys, I want a restaurant, and all of us look at him and like, well, we've never done a restaurant. Or hey guys, I want to do a hotel. What we've done together as a family here at Magnolia is said, let's figure it out. And I think in that's created this tight-knit community where we really feel like family, we feel like comrades who just tackle things together. We weren't experts in the restaurant business or in the bakery but what we did was decide that we're open to it and we want to risk and we want to learn and we want to continue to evolve. So I feel like the culture here is that anything's possible and that it's going to be hard work, but it's doing work that really matters.
Yeah, I love that. And I would just say, bottom line, Joe and I always, whenever we relate to like what's the secret of Joe and I's relationship, and I would say that over years we kind of wrestled with that and wonder what it is that we like each other, is that we enjoy each other, is that we respect each other. And I think at the end of the day, Joe and I are kind to one another. I would almost argue, and we're not perfect in this context, so make no mistake, we're like everyone in that we have our shortcomings, but generally speaking, we are kind to one another first, and then we're right, and we're adamant, and we're strong-willed, and all these other things second, third, and fourth. And so I would say that one thing we've done a good job of as it relates to Magnolia and the culture that we have here is that we lead with kindness. Kindness is a very important fabric that I would say sort of is an undercurrent here at Magnolia. And when you're unkind, you don't fit, and it's quick that becomes clear quickly. And when you're kind and you lead with kindness, we have found that lots of great things can then mature from that starting point. And that's been a big passion of Joe and I as we built this, is that we want people to have mutual kindness between one another that then eventually evolves into mutual respect. And then once you get that respect and the lead with the kindness, boy, it's amazing what people are able to do together when they're really pulling in the same direction and working together as a team.
Have you ever had to sever a relationship with a partner or a vendor or a supplier or someone that you thought wasn't leading with kindness or didn't share your values around kindness?
Yeah, of course. And I wished that I could quickly say no to that, but I will say that kindness is an interesting fundamental value that I would say takes a minute to get acclimated to. And I think some people are just naturally drawn towards kindness, and some people are naturally drawn towards the counter. And so for sure, there have been examples.
Sometimes that gets confused, just the idea of kindness in and of itself. I think you think that means when you lead with kindness, it's everything is this thing with this cheer. I think kindness is also being direct and being respectful.
Sure.
But I think sometimes that can be confused with
weakness or being passive or something.
Yeah. And so I think, what we see around us are these amazing leaders on our team that are very direct. They are goal oriented. They want to get the job done, but they're respectful. And they're kind, but I just think sometimes you can get lost in that word kindness,
Sure, no,
even with partners. And I'd say from the beginning, when we partner with people, we really vet it out and we sit across the table and we say, hey, we can see this working. And I will say, for the most part, all of our partners have really become like family. It becomes this thing where the reason why we said yes to begin with, just like with Meredith and the magazine, is because when we sat around that table, we felt like they truly respected what we wanted. I respected what they grew. And so with that mutual respect, I think you can really do great things together. But sorry, I wanted to just, sometimes kindness, I feel, is like, everyone be kind.
Sure.
I want to be kind to my kids, but I also want to teach them. And I also want to discipline them. And I also, so there is this thing of,
and in fairness, Joe's making a really good point. We've got a bunch of highly competitive people, and I would say Joe and I, the worst of these. And so I don't, make no mistake, I'm not talking about being a pushover or conceding to everything along the way because you don't want to come across as whatever. But I mean, I just mean even at the end of a hard-fought battle, for you to go and shake hands and say, well done, or great match, or whatever the circumstances might be, that there's some element of that is very important to us. But I appreciate that clarity because make no mistake, we want to win.
That's pretty clear. It's really interesting. Daniel Lubetsky, who's the founder of Kind Snacks, often makes that distinction. He says there's a difference between being kind and being nice. These are different words and they mean different things. In the time we have remaining, I'd love to spend some time talking about creativity and inspiration, because that is such a core tenet of what we write about and cover here at Fast Company. Joanna, where do you find inspiration? And when you are feeling creatively challenged, how do you get unstuck?
Yeah,
that's good. Great question.
I love that because I have a lot of creative friends, and it's different for every creative. And I think for a lot of them, it's getting out of town. It's going somewhere and changing the landscape, and I love that. I personally, though, don't love to travel. So for me, I get most inspired when I'm at home. And so sometimes that's at the kitchen island when I'm cooking dinner, and all of a sudden, as I'm cooking, this idea comes. I have to write it down.
Sure.
It's me in the garden with the kids, rarely talking. I just watch them in their own little world doing their thing. And so I, from the beginning with Fixer, and when all this stuff started happening with being noticed and recognized, because we're, again, very normal people. So it was a bit jolting to go to Target and people want pictures. But from the beginning, I think Chip and I both said, we've got to find something that is like our leveler, our anchor. And that for Chip has been the farm with the animals and the kids. And for me, it's truly been the kitchen and the garden. And so it's not that romantic of an answer, but it's at home. That's where I feel like I get the most inspiration when I write down some of the ideas that I look back at now, whether that be, opening the silos or even opening up the bakery. It all kind of stemmed from this dream that came to me at home.
Chip, do you have any sources of inspiration, or, when you're trying to solve a problem, is there a trick you use to jolt you or jog you into creativity?
Sure. I'm not terribly creative, but I will say for me, work begets work. And the old adage about the rolling stone gathers no moss, those kind of analogies are really practical for me, because I find when I work, and I mean really work, it draws me to more work. And I don't want to say that in this odd workaholic or somebody that never spends any time with his family. I mean, I think there's these balances in life that we're all desperately trying to wrestle with and try to find some harmony in. But for me, my mind is the clearest when I've broken a sweat, when I'm out actually working and tending to something. And I've even heard this analogy a few times, like as people lose their way, that there's something about getting your hands behind the plow and actually getting back into that service or that work that it sort of allows for everything else to become a little less foggy, because we all know, God knows, especially as you sit there and scroll mindlessly through social media platforms, you can quickly lose your way because you forget what's what. But when you go out and actually mow the grass, or when you go tend to animals that need you for their survival, it doesn't take long for you to go, look, some of these things I can get to later. They may be important, some are and some aren't. I don't mean to belittle all of them, but I would just say I think that we kind of take this 10% stuff and assume that 1,000 pieces of 10% deep scenarios is the equivalent to the deep well. And I can just assure you from my perspective that that's not true. One deep well is worth 1,000 shallow wells. And I think the deeper we get and the more intimate we are with the work that we're trying to accomplish, the clearer our minds get, and the easier it is to see what I would refer to as the future. I mean, Joe and I have both had different experiences to where we really felt like we saw what was around the corner. And those moments are rare and very unique, but for business builders, for entrepreneurs, they're very important, because if you can't see clearly ahead of you, how are you going to convince anybody to follow you,
Yeah. I want to ask very quickly about Waco, Texas, your hometown, which has played such an important role in Fixer Upper. It was the backdrop for so many of the home renovation projects. You both attended Baylor University, which is in Waco. Is Waco an inspiration, or has it influenced your creative process in any way?
I would say absolutely. I mean, Waco is really simple for us in the sense that it's where you can find us. Chip and Joanna are always present in Waco, Texas. And I would say that as the show started to evolve, we started feeling some pressures of Waco's not big enough. Waco's not going to work. You've got to start moving outside of that ecosystem to accomplish the net end that all of us then realized were different. We had a goal and an objective, and other groups had different goals and objectives. And I would just say that it became very clear. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a bluff. We were just like, look, our construction company is in Waco, Texas. I wouldn't know how to build you a house in New York State if my life depended on it. I have no subcontractors there. I don't have a license there. I mean, there are lots of obvious explanations as to why that wouldn't work for me. And so as that became clear, Joe and I really got excited about, again, that clarity point that Waco is part of our story, because that's where you can find us. And if you want to tell a story that relates to us, you're going to need to come to Waco, Texas, in order for us to facilitate that. And so Waco is definitely the backbone of lots and lots of things, not to mention it's where all 5 of our children are born. Neither Joe or myself were born in Waco, Texas. So it's not like we're 3rd generation Wacoans and we refuse anybody to ever consider anything.
We both went to college here, and I think what we loved about the city the most is just its resilience. So many things you can look back in history and see some really devastating moments that happened here in this town. And you see the way that the community came back together to rebuild is just a beautiful story. And so when you step out, you can feel that in the air. There's this place of resilience.
Where have you been all my life?
I just like Waco. And I'll say,
we need to start doing these interviews more often. This is amazing.
But Chip came from Dallas and I came from Austin. And so both of us after college were both like everybody else.
We're getting out of here.
We're getting out of here. No one was graduating and staying in Waco. But then there was
no one, but very few. Very few. Yeah.
You're in the minority if you stood. But I think for Chip and I, when we didn't know each other in college, and then we found each other in Waco because he decided to stay, I decided to stay. And that's what really drew us together, is that we both believed in this town and we didn't want to get out of town. We wanted to build something here.
Last question. This is the Fast Company Innovation Festival after all, and I want to ask you a little bit about innovation. For each of you, what's something that you think you have either collectively or individually put out into the world or changed about the genres that you operate in that you're proudest of? What are the things that you've innovated that, give you a sense of pride?
Oh, shoot. You got nothing? I was hoping you were going to lead. I'll start. I feel very proud of the way that Joe and I handle adversity and one another as it relates to our experience with television up to this point. I feel like we've gotten lots of encouragement about just it was interesting or it was exciting to watch a couple that cared about one another, or that were kind to one another, or that didn't seem to have drama in order to keep things interesting. And so I don't know how innovative that is, but I will say I just
Maybe
feel
we're not innovative.
we're probably not innovative.
That seems like a big word.
Our idea of innovation is maybe we've over innovated in some ways, and maybe there's some areas that we could go back to maybe the way our grandparents or our great grandparents did it in some ways. Now I will be very clear as I say that I also know, just as a society, how far we've come from those days and how much farther we still have to go. But I would say that knowing your neighbors, that's an anchor that I don't want us to lose. I don't want us to throw the baby out with the bathwater in the sense of being kind to one another and caring about each other. And back to my point about there being a world where you can open a book and read real pages. It's like, I want to advance and I want to evolve and I want to be innovative as much as the next person, but I also want to know who my neighbors are, and I want to care about them, and I want to be there for them in their time of need, and I hope that they'll do the same in return, but I would say that Joe and I just believe in a lot of ways, just these simpler ways of life. And I think that sometimes innovation can kind of run contrary and sort of confuse those. But if we can figure out how to innovate and how to be progressive and how to get better in categories that are so important to all of us in our human advancement, but also hold dear to some of those other parts of the equation that I'm referring to, I think that there will be a really green pasture that we all land in here as we continue to move this thing down the road. What about you?
Well, it's hard because it's not.
You innovated wood on a wall, and now it's called shiplap.
So maybe we can just leave it there. No, I think maybe the word isn't innovation.
You innovated the way people smell a candle and want a candle in a certain way.
I think what I hope that people, after even listening to this or after watching watch the show or the magazine, for me, it's just that there's beauty to be found everywhere, and to look for that and to find the hope in that, whether that be an old house, and to not be overwhelmed by it, but see the hope and the beauty in that. If it's a relationship, I just feel like people looking at things with a different lens, a lens of hope. And even if that means the magazine industry or the cable industry, to not be so naive, but to also say, well, where is there somewhere that we can create beauty even here, even if it is going in a direction that we don't know about in the next 2 years.
Sure. In
this time right now, what can we add to that that is full of hope and full of beauty? And so I know that's not an innovation, but I don't think of myself as an innovator. I just think of myself as someone who just really likes to put pretty things out in the world, and hopefully people are inspired and feel hope by them.
I wonder if it's innovative the way I feed the goats.
Yeah, it is.
Would that qualify?
He uses a galvanized bucket and has a goat call. Sorry. We'll think of that innovator one. We'll
oh my gosh.
Next time we'll have a better answer for you.
Fair enough. No, those answers were great. Chip and Joanna Gaines, thank you so much for being part of the Fast Company Innovation Festival, and best of luck with the network.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Mehta, editor of Fast Company. I am so pleased to welcome to the Fast Company Innovation Festival Chip and Joanna Gaines, co-founders of Magnolia, a home and lifestyle brand, and co-chief creative officers of the forthcoming Magnolia Network. Chip and Joanna, thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
So we were supposed to do a version of this conversation back at South by Southwest in March, and unfortunately, the conference was canceled due to the spread of COVID-19. I'd just love to ask how you and the family have been doing since then, and how you've been keeping occupied and sane during this period.
Yeah, a lot of complications and a lot of used to sane and family and all the things were sort of easy, sort of second nature. But now to keep your sanity and to manage the family life during these very unique times that we're all sort of wrestling through together has been just unlike anything I've ever experienced. I'm 45 years old, and obviously been through a few things, give or take, but this COVID thing has really been unique and very complicated, to say the least. And it's interesting when you say the South by Southwest and how we were scheduled to be there. Doesn't that feel like 100 years ago?
It does.
Even as you said that, I remember when it was forced to cancel and how we kind of reeled from that, because I don't remember the exact statistics, but that event had gone consecutively for some number of decades. Mm-hmm. And for it to have gotten canceled, back at that time just seemed really jolting.
And they were giving the numbers of like how businesses in Austin would be affected. And at the time we didn't know what was coming. We thought, oh, this is going to be a hard month for, so now where are we?
Months and months later. Yeah.
Almost October. It's just crazy that depending on where you are in the country and how things are slowly opening up, it's just been one of those things I think that has forced all of us to reevaluate just specific foundations, whether that be in the home, like the things we're used to and how all of that